Hello everybody, welcome back. I'm bringing you another one of those videos where I'm taking a piece from one light and moving it to another light to see if it's possible to make it work. I'm working on that 174 beacon, that oscillating light that I just originally built the collar for, but I didn't have a motor for it. Well, a good buddy of mine happened to find me an old twinsonic light bar that has no lenses, kind of looks like it was probably sitting somewhere near the coast. All the aluminum is heavily oxidized from like salt and stuff like that. But the motor was pretty much about the same kind as the one that'd be on the beacon rays. The only difference is the beacon rays are very, they're fully round. The ones on those twinsonics are kind of round and then they're flat on top and bottom. But overall, the shape is fairly much the same. So I was kind of curious, if I got that light, is it possible to take that motor and move it over to my beacon ray? Because the gear and all that stuff is pretty much the same. So I went ahead and got it and took it apart and kind of looked at it and realized for me to make it work, I have to make a small modification to it. Now, this is a very, very simple modification that you can do. So say for some reason you can't find a motor for your beacon ray, but you're able to come across a cheap twinsonic and it has that style motor on it, this is something you could easily do and essentially convert it to your beacon ray and make it work. So I'm going to show you what I did. Okay, so here's the twinsonic bar I picked up. You can see how heavily oxidized it is. Nothing's really locked up. It doesn't sound too healthy, but it did have the motor right here. I've already pulled it off. Now this is where things changed. The way the motor bolted onto this right here was 4 little bolts right here. So obviously, once I took those off, I took it over to my carriage for my beacon ray, and that's where I realized that's not going to work, and I'm going to have to come up with a solution to essentially make that work. So let me go ahead and get my camera on the stand and I'll show you what I did. Okay, so what I had to do was for the beacon ray, it actually takes, essentially the motor has to have studs hanging out of the front side of it, so you can put nuts right here to lock it on. Well, the way this motor originally was, you can see I got studs on there now, but the way this motor originally was, it had these style right here, where it just had kind of like the carriage style kind of bolt on it, and it went in this way. So the carriage bolt actually went from the top this way down, like that. So there was nothing there, and then I just had a nut on the backside. So obviously, in order for me to make this work, I would have to have studs. So first thing I did before I did anything with it is I took it and kind of held it up to make sure that the 2 locations right here were going to line up with the holes in the bracket. So then I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull it apart and see what I need to do to potentially make this work. I'm not going to pull the entire thing completely apart. I'm just going to pull the back case off real fast because I want to kind of show you what I did on the inside to essentially achieve this right here to make it actually work. All right, so essentially what I did here is I just went to Ace Hardware and I picked up just regular all thread. Now this was 6 inches long, so I wanted to make sure I had enough to do what I needed to do. I cut it off. And this is a 5/32, so that's what the thread and the bolt size is just 5/32, and Ace Hardware is the only place I can find something like that. So essentially what I did here is on the back side here, you can see where you have your plate right here. Let me get this out of the way. This plate right here that has your brushes that go onto it. Then those bolts come through, and then you have these spacers right here, and then you have these nuts right here. Well, the problem I ran into initially when I had this one is you can see where when it would go inside there, obviously those it would lock onto there with just enough coming out of the back cap. But I couldn't just take a regular bolt and go from the backside and come this way and just ran a bolt through there, because then I would have no way of re-anchoring these pieces right here. So essentially all I did was I took a piece of all thread, I put 2 nuts on the front here at the distance that I felt I needed for it to go through the carriage of the light, ran the all thread through here, put the nuts back on here, tightened them up like they're supposed to be, and then once I ran it through the back side of the cap and put the nut on there, then I cut the excess off. So realistically, all I did was I just took this all thread, stuck the all thread in here just like this, put 2 nuts on the one side, put the nuts back on. Now these are the nuts that actually came on the motor. I reuse those because this distance between here and here, when that cap goes on, is not so, it's not a lot of space here, as you can see. So the full size nut wasn't going to work. So that's why you have to use the same thread, which is a 5/32, so you can put the original nuts back on that go on here. So then after I slid that through there, put those nuts back on there. Obviously this was this long right here. When I put the back cap on, then all I did is I put the back cap back on it tightened up the nuts, cut off the excess, and that essentially gave me the studs that I needed and made it to where everything was still fully anchored. But you can't just take a bolt and go through your cap going this way, because once you do that and you go through your cap, you will not be able to get all these nuts and everything back on here. You pretty much have to put all this assembly together first, then you essentially slide your cap onto it. So that's really all I did to make that modification. Let me go ahead and pop the cap back on. I'm going to screw it to the carriage just to show you how it fits. All right, so you can see I got the back cap back on, got the screws here. The reason for the two nuts here is you see you got to have a little bit of a spacer here, so this way it sits like it needs to because of the, the shape of the housing here. You want to make sure that's not touching right there, so that was the reason for the two nuts right there. And then pretty much you can see it lines right up with the two location holes that are supposed to be in there. Now I've already put my gear in there and made my adjustments, which I'm going to have to redo that again. And everything works perfectly fine, just like it's supposed to. I've already took the top section and set it on there just to make sure. And obviously all this stuff still clears. The part of the housing that comes around clears this perfectly with no problems. There's no obstructions or anything like that. So the next step is for me just to go ahead and put it all back together. And I'm going to see this light work for the first time since I got it. But I thought this right here was some really good information to share with everybody. So like I said, if you can get a hold of a twinsonic pretty cheap and it has this style motor, you can modify it with 2 pieces of all thread to make it work on your beacon ray. Thanks for watching.